Hey guys, how's it going? Glad to see you. So, I am so sorry that light is kind of like right like that. Yeah, that's probably better. There we go. So, I wanted to, there's a couple more folks. And so, my thought for today is, since there's a small group, why don't you guys tell me where we're going to start? We've got like 59 minutes together. And I'm happy to review any documents that make sense to you. Typically, what we do in this time is either offers to purchase or the standard form real estate contract, the listing agreement, the buyer agreement, those documents that you're utilizing kind of every day to write and grow business. So why don't we do this? Why don't you throw in the chat the document that you'd like to start with. Let's choose from these three. We have offers to purchase, so writing an offer, taking a listing, or signing a buyer. So buyer form, listing contract, or writing an offer. Which do you prefer to start with? Throw that in the chat, and we will take a little poll. Okay, all right, so it looks like we're going to start with writing an offer and then move to buyers, right? So we had offers and buyers. So I will start with the offer process and then pivot over to buyers. And I will do my darndest to get them both done in 58 minutes so everyone gets what they want. Does that sound good? Okay, good. So for those of you who said offer to purchase, there are a couple of different offer to purchase forms, right? Depending on where you do business, as well as how the market's moving. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the middle ground. So there's an offer to purchase, which is typically used in the kind of northern Fairfield County world. There's a purchase agreement, which is used kind of mid-Fairfield to along the coast. And then there's the 3 or 4 page contract, which is used pretty much in eastern Fairfield County and then the entire rest of the state for all intents and purposes, right? So 3 different versions of an offer to purchase. And then, of course, if you work in a specialty market like Greenwich, oftentimes in a specialty market like Greenwich, they really do more things more like the way they do in New York, which is more of like a memorandum of sale instead of an actual document, right? So I'm going to work in the middle. The offer to purchase itself and the 4 page contract are 2 extremes of writing an offer. The middle version is the purchase agreement. And so what I'm going to do is walk through that purchase agreement with you, because you can utilize the purchase agreement information to write up an offer to purchase. And I'll show you each of these forms. Write up an offer to purchase, that's very similar, but you can also use it to write up, to do a fill in the blank 4 page contract as well. So if we go right in the middle, and I'll walk you through this 2 page document in writing an offer, you can then utilize it, even if you're not using that form particularly, you can use that information on either of the other 2 as well. Sound good? Okay, good. So where are we? We're going to start with, just share my screen with you and open the right form. I'm getting there. Where are we? Come on. There it is. All right. Now, if you have questions as we go, do me a favor, unmute and interrupt me, because when I'm sharing my screen, it's harder for me to view and monitor the chat. So
I have a question.
Just unmute and ask the question as we're going through. Yeah, Ronnie, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just curious. So are all these forms at a certain location that you grabbed it from, or?
So all of these forms can be found on command in the libraries in command and in
In the
DocuSign.
libraries in the command, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I have, like, I just happen to have a form, it says offer to purchase, so that's like this, is this the same thing, or is this different?
Yeah, so I can't see what you're holding up. Put it up to the camera.
Oh, it just says, I'm sorry. Can't see it. It
So,
says,
so
it
right,
says
so
willing to offer to purchase.
right. So as I said, there are three different versions of the same form. There's the offer to
Okay.
purchase, the purchase agreement, and
Okay,
then
I'm
the
sorry.
4-page contract, right? So depending on where you do business, that's going to be reasonable and customary in that area, right?
Okay,
The form that you're looking at is used more in Northern Fairfield County. The form that we have up on the screen is used in Central and along the coast. And then the 4-page contract is used in Eastern Fairfield County and across the rest of the state. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't use any of these forms any place. That's
Okay.
just typically geographically what people are used to seeing.
okay,
In different markets, bring this off. In different markets, sometimes people use different types of offers to purchase as well. For example, when the market is moving so quickly, a lot of buyers agents have moved to using the 4-page fill in the blank contract because they wanted some clarity for their buyers if and when the sellers signed the contract that it was actually going to stick, right? The offer to purchase is not really a contract. The purchase agreement is supposed to be a contract, though many attorneys believe that it's easily escaped from. And the 4-page contract is supposed to be the most binding of the three. So again, there's no right or wrong answer to which you use. It's really driven more by geography and or the market and what your buyers are looking to accomplish. The other thing to remember is if you're writing a piece of business, like when I go and buy an investment property in Waterbury, they use the 4-page contract. And it took me years to finally get through my thick skull that just because I was used to writing things on an offer to purchase, that when I'm buying there, but listing agents there get that offer to purchase form. They're like, what is
this?
Like, why are you sending it to me? It's like, give me a contract.
Right.
So you have to start to understand where you're writing business. And if the listing agent on the other side says, you know what, we're only accepting things on this document, then you redo it on that document because the listing agency pretty much gets to write those rules, right? All right, so the example we're going to go through is the purchase agreement, and as I said, what you'll see here is pretty much similar to what the offer to purchase looks like, as well as the actual 4-page contract. And so we can extrapolate the information, but we're going to go step by step through this one just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. So of course, a lot of this stuff up the top of these contracts is all very, very simple, and they're not trick questions. You put in the date you're writing the offer. The agreement is between the sellers and the buyers, right? So this first piece you can see here, well, I can't really highlight, so you'll have to kind of read through. Can you see my little hand cursor? Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
yes.
Perfect. So I thought I could highlight it, but I don't know if I can. Oh, well, now I highlighted the whole thing. So I'm just gonna kind of circle where I'm asking you to take a look. So you can see the first piece is about the sellers and the second piece is about the buyers. That's how you know which name goes in which line. So it's an agreement between John and Maria Smith, residing at 123 Main Street, who agree to sell, and whoever I didn't say, like Marty and Janine Thompson, who agree to buy the property known and described as, and then the property address would go here. Oftentimes the property address is the same as the seller's. Hold on a second, we've got a live mic, let me address that. Okay. Oftentimes the property address that's being sold, which again goes here on this 5th line, is the same as where the sellers are currently living. It doesn't have to be, and yet oftentimes it is. So you'll have the sellers and their address, and the buyers and their address, and then the property address. That's how this form gets filled out. And then as you move forward, the form goes through including and exclusions and exclusions, right? Including the following extra items. I'll tell you how I typically have filled this form out. Whenever I have inclusions, oftentimes there's an inclusion exclusion separate document that exists, right? And so if you've retrieved that from the documents on the MLS or the listing agent has sent you that, you can always, upon review of it, if it's what the buyers are looking to agree with, you can always say as per the attached inclusion exclusion addendum, if there is one. But minimally, what I would do is write in as per MLS number 1703614447, right? Whatever that MLS number is that that ties all this information together, you can just simply list that here. That way you don't have to list every single inclusion, because if it's listed on the listing and you're referencing the listing number in this offer to purchase, you're kind of tying those things together. So what I would do, what I used to do is write in as per list number 1703, whatever, including, and then I would just put the big stuff. So I would write in the bigger stuff. So like the appliances, and if there was, an outside swing set that we wanted to include. So the big stuff I would list separately, but the rest of it I would just cover by saying as per the list number. And then the exclusions, the same thing. If there's an inclusion exclusion addendum, you can certainly reference it here as per the inclusion exclusion or attached inclusion exclusion addendum. Or if there isn't one, or it doesn't address some of the things that you want excluded, right? Getting clarity and having certainty around what is in and what is out, really important. So perhaps, I think I just told this story in Ignite the other night, but I one time sold a house where there was this massive steel or iron anvil bolted to the floor of the garage. And so one of the things that we wanted to be certain about was get rid of the anvil before we close, right? So it didn't convey, and the buyers didn't have to make it their problem once they were moving in, right? So if there's something specific that you want removed from the property or excluded from the sale, I know that oftentimes sellers have like the old crappy refrigerator that's 37 years old down in the refrigerator down in the basement that they use just as an extra fridge. Well, oftentimes buyers are like, look, I don't want your old crappy refrigerator, right? Take it with you. And the sellers are just as happy to leave it because it's one less thing that they have to pay to move, right? And so getting clarity around those kinds of things, and if your buyers want it out, having that excluded here is important. I know when I buy my investment properties, the exclusion line always says excluding any like personal items or debris that happen to be in the attic, the basement, and the outbuildings, garages prior to closing, right? So those kinds of things are what you use the including and exclusion for. Any questions on that? Okay, so moving right along, the middle piece is all about the money, right? And so the money gets handled this way. You typically have 5 lines to work with on the money side. Do some math on the side for you. And the way this gets filled out is the first line is for the entire offer, right? So to keep the math easy, let's just call this a $500,000 offer, right? So the terms and conditions of the sale are as follows. The price will be $500,000. And so you put in the offer price right there at the top. The second line is typically the 1% good faith estimate, right? Which doesn't necessarily have to be 1%, right? It can be whatever percent the buyers choose, including no percent if they choose, right? There's no law that says you have to put down 1%. It's just, again, in Connecticut, reasonable and customary to have some money down with the offer. And your buyers would be foolish not to do what is reasonable and customary because it's what the sellers are expecting. So generally speaking, in this scenario, we would put in 1% here. So 1% of the $500,000 is $5,000 as a binder to be held in escrow by, and then you'd fill in to be held in escrow by, you'd fill in the name of whoever is holding it in escrow, right? Which used to be us, which is no longer us, right? So nowadays, the escrow is being held directly by the buyer's attorney. So you'd write in the buyer's attorney name as trustee, right in that after that buy. Yes, Lisa.
Quick one. Are you finding when there are so many multiple offers, do you, I've had some agents say do, some agents say don't, not even bother with the 1% when you submit the multi offers, when there's so many offers coming in?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I've been doing personally is instead of forgetting it, I use it as a tool. And so when I'm buying investment properties and having to fight for them, like your buyers having to fight for their housing, instead of 1%, I'll put down 10 or 20% right up front, because I want to be able to show the seller that I actually have money and that my offer is strong and that I want the property. And so I use that as a signal to say, hey, look at me. I am putting down a whole bunch of money right up front, to have them take notice. You also have some colleagues who are utilizing that line as a non-refundable tool, saying that they're putting down $5,000 non-refundable until or unless the seller doesn't choose that offer. And so what they're saying is, we're going to put down this 1%. It'll be held in escrow. But if we change our minds once we submit this offer to you, it's yours. It's another way to try and make the offer stronger and get chosen, because the buyers are now risking some capital.
Would you say that's a good idea if you have first-time home buyers who are absolutely hell-bent on putting every possible contingency known to man on their offers, even when you've had discussions with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think what they'll find is they'll just keep getting refused, and at some point, I think everyone has to kind of look around and say, maybe this is just not the market for you. Right.
Do you
Because
think maybe a new suggestion would be say, hey, why don't you go in and offer a non-refundable, because you have these contingencies, they want to maybe kind of offset it?
yeah, I mean, that could certainly work if the buyers are that hell-bent on wrapping themselves in bubble wrap. It's probably not going to work, simply because the non-refundable, the whole reason they want the contingencies is because they want to be able to change their mind. Right.
Exactly.
So the non-refundable money could be a struggle.
Hey, and Rick, anybody who says once a buyer loses 2 or 3 properties, they learn, try 9 lost properties and they still haven't learned.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. They need to be counseled out of the market. I would stop wasting time with people who are not willing and able to see the demands of the market. I would tell them to take 6 months off and let's get back together later on. But that's just me. So line number 3, back to our form. Line number 3 is cash on signing the superseding contract. So oftentimes, if we're going to go with a standard kind of 1%, and then the contract signing would be another like 9%, so you have a total of 10% down. Now, again, those numbers are flexible. It could be 1% and an additional 4% for a total of 5% down. You have to work with your buyers and see what they're comfortable with. Some buyers don't have as much cash to put up front because it's either coming from another house or whatever. So you have to work with your buyers. But I like, again, for me personally, I like being as strong as possible and showing the sellers that I am willing to take my money and put it up front, and all they have to do is say yes to me, and we'll go to closing. So I push as much money up front as possible. In that, I don't use line 4 very often, like additional cash to come to the table. If I'm getting a mortgage for the property, the only thing that comes at the closing is the mortgage money. I've already put all the rest of my money up front because I want them to, again, see that I'm committed to the property.
Hey, Rick,
Yes.
I wish I knew this yesterday. I think I just lost my offer because I thought that the second line, because my client has the money, but what I did was I put 1% down on the second line, and then on the third line I put another 4%, and then at closing I have another 5%. So if I knew, because I'm used to using the 4-page where I could, put 5% down when they accept the offer, I didn't know that I could actually push everything up front on this one either. I wish I knew this yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, so ultimately the way the offer is structured really is determined by the buyer, right? So regardless of the form you're using, you can structure it however the buyer is comfortable structuring it. Just knowing that the more you push up front, if the buyer themselves steps away and defaults, you're risking more money potentially than was necessary. What I've just noticed is that if you want to be the winner today, you have to be willing to risk a little bit more, right? Or else you just keep being the bridesmaid over and over and over again. So line number 3 is whatever else you want to put down on contract, and again, those numbers are flexible. You can make it be whatever you want. And then line number 4 would, in this form, would be the rest of the money. So just to give you an example, if we had a $500,000 offer price, line 1 would be that 1% or $5,000. Line 2, again, just as an example, could be the extra 9%. So a total of 10% down up front, right? So now you're at 1% and 9%, so 5,000 and 45,000. And then line 4 would be the additional 10%, because the 80% is going to be the mortgage, right? So that leaves a 10% gap. So you have to bring 10% more cash to close, right? So then that line 4 in this example would be another $50,000. So you've got 500,000 on line 1, 5,000 on line 2, 45,000 on line 3, 50,000 on line 4. Again, in this example, as 1%, 9%, and 10%. So now you have a total of 20%, and the mortgage will take care of the 80%. Of course, over here, you're going to fill in the proposed closing date when you're making the offer. I encourage you to have a conversation with the listing agent and ask very specifically, hey, is there a date that works best for the sellers? And then just use that date, right? If the buyers can't concede to a closing date, especially nowadays, they're not going to win the house, right? So you've got to keep asking questions of the list side to see what works for the sellers, and use those numbers, use those dates, use that information in the offer. I find that I'll get there in just a second, Bill.
Sure.
I find that if you use that information, there's just one less thing to negotiate, right? So if the listing agent says, they really want to close by August 15th, and it's possible for the buyers to do that, well, then just put in August 15th, because it's one less thing that the sellers will say, oh, well, now we have to go back to them and ask them for a different amount of money and a different closing and this and that. So keep removing the distractions and have the sellers be able to check as many boxes positively as possible up front. Go ahead, Velma.
Okay, yeah, 2 questions. In regards to the purchase price, because I had a situation yesterday where I wrote an offer and the lender stated to my buyer clients that they can put the closing costs into the offer. So I had to increase the offer price by $10,000. But then I guess where I got confused at, but I put in the contingency contingent upon I guess 10,000 towards closing costs. And I guess my question is, when I increase the price, the offer price, all the additional figures is based on the whole total. So if we're talking about 500,000, if we're adding another 10,000, which would be 510,000. Now the 1% down, would it be based on 500,000 or would it be based on the 510,000? Because we put closing costs into it.
Yes, that's a great question. And so what I would say is the cleanest way to do that is, if the offer is 500 and then you're going to put 10 on top of it for closing costs, I would write it at 510, but then do everything else underneath off of the 500, and then reference that someplace else on the form, perhaps in the contingencies box, to say, you know, seller to provide $10,000 closing credit to close, and because then all the other numbers are
Oh,
right,
gotcha.
right? Because you're netting that $10,000 out, and then the $5,000 and the 45,000 and the extra 50,000 and the mortgage, that's all then correct. That's how I would do it.
Okay.
And
I would-
what's most
Oh, I'm sorry.
important is that your buyers understand how you're writing it up, and you're having a conversation with the listing agent so that they understand how it's being written up. Right? There's no right or wrong way to do it, as long as everyone's clear about what the expectations are, so that everyone can agree or disagree.
Gotcha. Okay.
And would that be the same for the mortgage, for the mortgage? Let's just say the house is 500,000, since you're using that number, but my client wants to come out of pocket 10,000. So would we write an offer based on the 510 or the 500? Because my client will be taking that 10,000 out of their pocket.
So what's the 10,000 for, Donald? Is it
All right, let's just say the mortgage company would only lend 500,000, but my client wants to put 510 on the house. So the mortgage stops at 500. She's coming out of pocket an extra 10,000. When writing the offer, would you use 510 or like based on the percentage wise, or would you use 500?
Yeah, so great question. And in that case, I would use 510. Like in either case, I would use 510 as the purchase price on line one. But in the second scenario that Donald put on the table, I would write everything else up based on the 510, not the 500, because it's not, you're not netting it out. It actually is a cost to the buyer. So in that scenario, the 1% might be, and again, it doesn't always have to be exactly 1%, right? It can be a little more or a little less. So you could keep the numbers the same and just make up the difference in what you bring to the closing table. Or you could literally write it through as 1% of 510,000, which is 5,100, then another 9% off of 510, which is whatever that is, right? So in that scenario, I would use the percentages off of the 510, because it's the buyers that are actually absorbing that cost, not the sellers. All right, and then in line 5 is your mortgage contingency, right? So whatever cash is coming from a mortgage goes in that line. So in this scenario with the $500,000 and 80% financing, 80% of 500,000 is going to be $400,000. So we've already, on lines 2, 3, and 4, we've covered $100,000, and now we have $400,000 coming from the mortgage. You then will check a box as to whether or not there is a contingency for the mortgage, right? And if so, you'll put in a mortgage contingency date. You'll want to talk to your loan officer and lending partner to discuss what that date should be, so that you're not over-promising or under-promising. And so you'll simply fill in that date based on that conversation with the loan officer. So for all intents and purposes, you could write in 30 days from acceptance, or you could put in a date if you so chose. You know, if you were confident the offer was going to get accepted in the next 24 hours, you could then put in a date, which is 45 days from today. So you put whatever that date is, and you kind of exclude weekends and whatnot. But I'd have that conversation with the loan officer, with the buyer and the loan officer, so everyone can agree on a date that actually makes sense. Any questions on the math of all of this? Okay, so continuing to move forward, you've got contingencies, you've got a box there. So if you have any other specific contingencies other than what's listed here, instead of the check boxes, you could write that in. For example, if there was an appraisal contingency, you could write in there house to appraise at or above contracted sale price, if you so chose. Again, nowadays, contingencies tend to be the death of offers. So removing as many of those as the buyer is willing and able to do would be my suggestion. And yet, again, you don't get to make those decisions. The buyer has to make those decisions based on their level of comfort and what's going on in the market. Yes, Stuart.
Rick, how would those numbers change in terms of line 3? Would it be cash on taking title to premises? Is that what I put right there? So it'd be a 1%, then a 9%, and the balance be cash on taking title.
In which scenario, Stuart?
Yeah, if it's a cash offer.
Oh, sorry. So if it's cash,
Yep.
yeah. If it's
Yep.
cash, then the rest of the money just comes to closing. And so that would be all on line 4, correct?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And then line 5 would be 0. Don't leave anything
Yep.
blank. You want to make sure you're filling in everything, but line 5 would be a 0 since there is no mortgage. Got it.
Okay.
And so again, typically you're going to work through a building inspection or a septic inspection. You know, you check the appropriate boxes, write in anything that might need to be written in if it's not a checkbox. And then you see there it says to be completed by, and you'll put in a date. Generally speaking, you know, before this level of Ronnie, I'll get there in half a second. Before this level of competition in the market, we were using 7 days for inspections to be completed. Oftentimes that's not going to cut it anymore. We need to kind of tighten that up. What I do is when I'm ready to make an offer on something, I call my inspector and I line up the inspection for the next day or the next 48 hours after the day I'm presenting the offer, and have him hold a slot for me so that what I can do is go back and say to the listing agent and the seller, look, this will be completed in the next 48 hours. We already have the appointment for tomorrow at 12 noon, right? Because sellers want to see people who are moving swiftly, because if they say yes and take the house off the market, they want to be certain that all these things are moving to a place that they don't have to worry about if the deal falling apart. And if it does fall apart, they can come quickly back to some of these other opportunities. So tightening it up today makes sense. In a normalized market, 5 to 7 days makes sense. 5 to 7 calendar days makes sense to get your inspections done. Today, I kind of like more like 2 or 3. Any questions on your contingencies?
No, the question that I have is, because I have this client that I've been working with for the past couple of months, got in a couple of deals, and as we all could say, like, they got messed up at appraisal. So the appraisal has come back really short, and you know the sellers didn't want to adjust. So what my client now decides to do is if an offer gets accepted, she does the appraisal before the inspection. So, you know, how would you, you know, base that time frame, that 10 days time frame, you know, just to make sure, because the 10 days is for the inspection contingency, not for the appraisal, right?
Well, so again, in today's world, I think 10 days is I don't know a seller that will say yes to 10 days for an inspection contingency. I think it would have to be no other offers on the table for the seller to say yes. It's a crazy amount of time. And the struggle that you have is if you're looking to have an appraisal done that the bank will accept, you have to have a signed contract in order for the bank to order the appraisal. That goes through the appraisal management company. I'm just not sure how quickly one can get the appraisal completed. So again, if you have sellers who are willing to wait, then go for it. It's a great idea. I used to use that strategy myself in multiple offer scenarios where the buyer was a little freaked out and didn't want to waive the appraisal contingency. However, didn't really want to have to wave their arms saying we want an appraisal contingency in there. So we used to do the same thing. But those were in the days where we could choose our own appraisers, right? And have any old appraiser go and do it. Now you have to have it all go through the bank and through the appraisal management companies. So I'm just not sure how one would structure that such that the seller isn't sitting waiting for 2 or 3 weeks to get inspections done.
Yeah, that's what basically puzzles me, because I'm like, there's probably no way that both of those could happen in 10 days, you know. So yeah, that's tricky.
Yeah, and again, so it's it's one of those things where, the reality for buyers today is you're either a buyer or you're not. And if you are a buyer, you've got to recognize that you're not in the driver's seat. You will overpay. You will take risks that you likely wouldn't in a normalized market in order to be the winner today. And again, if buyers aren't willing to do all those things, that's okay. It doesn't make them bad people. It just makes them not buyers right now, because for the most part, that's what's out there, right? You got to move quickly. You've got to strip things down. You've got to pay through the nose, and that's just the reality of the market. And my fear is that we still have buyers out there who are not hearing that, either because we're not stating it, or we're not showing them proof of that, or that they want to stubbornly be right, and that's okay. If they want to stubbornly be right, they can do that. They just can't do it with my time. Thank you very much. All righty. So moving to the second page of this, purchaser acknowledges that the seller has furnished a property condition disclosure form. So this is just a yes or a no check if the disclosure form has been provided or not. Remember that the seller doesn't have a legal requirement to provide it. They can either provide it, in which case you would say yes here on the checkbox, or they have a right not to provide it and then just give a credit of $500 at closing. I will tell you that the big difference between the way attorneys advise sellers in Connecticut versus how attorneys advise sellers in New York is that almost every attorney in New York just advises their seller client to give the $500 credit and not provide the disclosure form. And the reverse is true in Connecticut. Most attorneys don't have an issue with sellers filling out the property condition disclosure. So just know either way is valid. You just have to check yes or no, depending on whether it's been provided or not. Contracts of sale to be signed on or before a certain date, right? So typically in a normalized market, if inspections were like 7 days, the second week would be for contracts to be written. So that's if in fact the information for the accepted offer is going back to the seller's attorney, who's going to write a full-blown attorney contract and then send that over to the buyer's attorney for review and signature. A lot of that has been skipped in recent months because of the pace of the market, and people are just either utilizing this document as the contract, or they're going straight to contract in that they're using that 4-page standard offer to purchase standard contract form on the MLS. So again, if you're utilizing this form, you're likely then going to have the attorneys write another contract. I think you minimally have to give them a week or so to get that done. So 7 days in here is today might be a better path than 14. Again, in a normalized market, 14 makes sense to me, calendar days. 7, I think today makes better sense. Now you'll notice this next paragraph says this agreement to remain in full force and effect and constitute a valid contract between the parties unless it's superseded by one that's written by their attorneys, right? That's what that paragraph says. So for all intents and purposes, this is once signed by both parties, this is supposed to be a contract, and then it gets replaced by when the attorneys write the real contract. Now I will tell you that a lot of attorneys have an opinion that language is not really all that strong, and that they can get their seller clients out if in fact the seller client chooses to be out. So when you write an offer on this document and it's signed by everybody, and then the next day the listing agent calls you and says, sorry, something better came in and we went with that, right? I understand you're upset. I understand the buyers are upset. However, unless the buyers are willing to sue the sellers for specific performance of this document, which they consider to be a contract, there's really not a whole lot that can be done. And because attorneys know that, because the listing agent the seller's attorneys and the listing agents are pretty clear that most attorneys on the buy side are not talking their buyer clients into filing lawsuits, that they should just kind of move on. The attorneys for the sellers are just more emboldened now than ever to not really hold a whole lot of, have this document hold a whole lot of water. You know that that's what it says. It's supposed to be a contract. I didn't write the rules. I don't make the laws, and I certainly don't have any control over how attorneys advise their clients. But do know what it says is oftentimes different than the way people will behave. Just so that everyone's clear.
Rick, quick
Yes.
question. That exact same thing happened to me. And another offer came in following day and they said, you can have it if your buyer will pay more money. Let me ask you this. And I said, well, we have a binder. It states it's a contract. The listing agent said, what you said, this has come directly from the seller's attorney.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. If I were to have used the 4-page contract, would that kind of be more substantial in the eyes of a seller's attorney?
So it is more substantial. However, what's built into the 4-page contract that isn't built into the offer to purchase or this purchase agreement is a 5 business day attorney review period, right? So if your same scenario came through and it was literally the next day,
it was like the day, yeah, it was, we exchanged immediately, both, executed, and then literally the next morning I got the call.
Yeah. So here's the good news. I'll tell you how I would choose to look at that. I would choose to look at it as good news because at least they came back and said, if you're willing to match the new offer, you can still keep the house. A lot of times you don't even get that opportunity, right? And I know that doesn't help a lot of buyers feel better about it, and yet it really is the honest truth is that 50% of the time you're not even getting a crack at it. It's like you're out, they're in. So the good news is you're being given the opportunity to match the offer. In that scenario, because the 4-page contract has that 5 business day attorney review period where either party can cancel for any reason, my guess is if your buyers said, no, I think we're just going to stick with the offer we made, then the sellers would just dump them anyway and move to the other offer. And because they would be within that 5-day attorney review period, there'd be nothing that could be done on that.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so here's the thing. There's no way, unless you really strip these contracts down and start to remove all of these items and still have buyers who are willing to sue to get the house that they want, which I have not one time experienced a buyer who was willing to file a lawsuit, not one time in 21 years. And these kinds of things happen all the time, right? Especially in the last 12 months, happens daily. I get phone calls. What can I do? What can I do? We had it and then we didn't have it. Yeah, that's called real estate. Sorry.
That's why Greenwich dropped them. And that's why they just do the memorandum, because they said they're finding, it's almost futile in the end if that should come up.
Yeah, it's true. If people are fighting for houses, these, be careful when you celebrate the win, right? Because you got to kind of get further into it and before you really know that you've won the property. I know that sounds a little irritating, but it at least right now that is the honest truth because of the pace of the market. And then of course the seller's sign and the buyer's sign, as you see here, and then the agent's names go there and the attorney's information goes there. And that is your purchase agreement. Now, as I said, the offer to purchase form reads very, very similar to this. It's not identical, but it's very similar to that. So you can extrapolate this information to fill that out. And the 4-page contract on the MLS also reads very similarly, except that it's expanded and there's a whole lot more words, except where you have to fill in is pretty much the same blanks that are on this form, right? So even though it's a big, long form and it seems kind of daunting, your fill in the blank activity is really just these lines translated into a larger document. The math lines are almost identical, right? Just read through and you'll do the same kinds of things. Any questions on writing up your offer in terms of your documentation?
Rick,
Just for clarity, I'm sorry, Frank. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just for clarity, Rick, you're saying the line that says the line below. I don't remember what's under the line, but you're saying for now it's best to use further down. So that line that says contract of sale to be signed on or before, you're saying the best thing to do now is to use that seven, like the week after the inspection?
Yeah, well, no, I think that today, because of the pace of the market, I would be doing it simultaneous to the inspections. I think the inspection should be happening within a couple of days, and the contract should be signed by the following week, right? Now, if the attorneys decided that's too little time or whatnot, they can start to work with making some adjustments to that date. But in terms of, remember, this document is part of it is to convey the terms that will have the seller say yes. So you want to make the offer as appealing as possible, and getting things done faster in today's market is all part of that. So so if you're utilizing this form and expecting to then go to contract, I would have that tightened up to 7 calendar days.
That was another mistake I made yesterday, because I put two weeks after the inspection, and now I'm like, man. But you learn. This is the first I'm doing this, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and so just always remember that the idea of these documents is let's win the house, right? So we have to write it in such a way that's as appealing as possible to the sellers. So when we get tighter and tighter and strip things down, it's more and more appealing to the sellers. It's how you win today versus not. Go ahead, Frank, and then Lisa.
Yes, and then once this is filled out, signed by your client, the buyer client, get it to, give a call to the listing agent and get it to him or her immediately, right? ASAP?
Yes, sir. Yes,
In
sir.
person?
Yeah. In person if geography permits. If not, scan it and email it, and then make a phone call to say, hey, Frank, it's Rick Scott. I just wanted to make sure that I would call to make sure that you knew an offer was coming from me, and then I would send it, and then I would call to make sure that you actually got it.
Good, thank you.
Sure thing. Lisa.
Yes, so Rick, my line of thinking's always been time is of the essence. And really, you want to get it in contract as fast as possible. So normally I think, well, once you get the green light on the inspection, there shouldn't be any reason why you just don't get the contracts executed immediately thereafter, say like within 48 hours after that, or within, 24 hours. Because normally, in my experience, the seller's attorney's already sent over the draft.
Yeah, I'll give you my opinion on that. My opinion on that is I don't think there's any reason to tie the signing of the contract to any other contingency. I think you handle it separately. And what I mean by that is if the inspections are 2, 3, 4 days later, and there's a contract that's already ready to be signed on day 2, I don't know why the buyers wouldn't, if the inspections are already a contingency of the transaction, that will get translated into the actual contract. So there's no reason to wait in signing the contracts, because even if the inspections go sideways, it's a contingency in the contract. So what's interesting is that as an industry, we have always kind of layered it that way. It's like, okay, inspections happen first, and then the contract, and then the appraisal. That's just the way it's kind of always been. It doesn't have to be that way. And so when you're trying to beat the clock, and I couldn't agree with the phrase Lisa used anymore, time is of the essence, right? Time is nobody's friend in any of these scenarios. And so you want to move as swiftly as possible, not just to try and lock everybody together, but to continue. When you're on the buy side, you want to show the seller and listing agent that your people are actually serious about buying this property. So taking fast steps and moving everybody forward swiftly is absolutely a part of the job. And if that means you have to get behind your buyers and push sometimes, then that's sometimes what it is. So Lisa, my answer is, if the contract's ready and the inspections haven't been worked out, as long and it's supposed to be contingent, as long as the contingency shows up in the contract, there's no reason not to have the buyers sign even before the inspections are done or completed.
Right, so as long as they have their, say, 10% down at contracting to go into escrow, you could say 48 hours from time of accepted offer to have fully executed contracts.
Yep, 100%.
Okay, great.
Or you could just use this, right? This is that 4-page real estate contract that comes from the MLS. As you can see, it looks very, very similar. All of the, come on, there we go. All of the lines pretty similar to what you've found, mortgage contingencies. Here's paragraph 8 is what I said before, is the attorney review clause. So if you can see that.
Yeah.
There we go. Right, the attorney review clause. And so without alteration, this contract, when used, gives both parties 5 business days after full execution, right? So the buyer's going to sign it, send it to the seller. Once the seller signs it, they have 5 business days. So that excludes Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. So 5 business days for attorney review, and either party can cancel for whatever reason during that period. That's the biggest difference between this 4-page contract and the offer to purchase and the.
But then if another offer came in, the seller could still pull out with this.
Yeah, if it's within those 5 business days.
Versus just getting a proper contract from the attorney in 48 hours, which would not give them that ability, because now they'd be in escrow.
Yeah, and again, the timing of in escrow is constantly being disputed by attorneys. And yet, yes, conceptually, I agree with what you're saying.
Right. Well, yeah, the 10% down.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I just wanted to give you a quick, this is what that 4-page contract looks like. As you can see, it's a whole lot of words, but there's not a whole lot of lines to fill in, right? It's all the same information as what we just saw. Just in a slightly different format. Yes, Ronnie.
Yes, you said that I'm curious, like what percentage, a lot of people you said are foregoing the contingency, the inspection being a contingency. Would you say like, I'm just like, what percentage? Like, so if you're working with a buyer and you want to put that out there as an option, in order to get the house, would you say that that's happening now, 50% of the time, or?
I wouldn't. What I would
No.
say is there are some buyers who are choosing to be more aggressive and do things this way. Is that something you
Okay.
want to do?
Okay, let it know it's an
Because-
option.
Yeah. I wouldn't. I'd be guessing. Anyone would be guessing as to an
Okay.
actual percentage, so.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And then just to make sure that we have covered our bases, I will show you quickly the offer to purchase form, right? And so that's this document, which again typically used in Northern Fairfield County, which again has all the same items to fill in. It's a very crowded form. It's not a terribly user-friendly form, and yet it is the form that is oftentimes used in Northern Fairfield County. So you kind of fill it in the same exact way. And but the main difference here is, note down here, this says this is not a contract of sale. You note right there, this is not a contract of sale. And yet, I will tell you, I have had people sue saying, we're going to sue you for specific, one time, had buyers sue saying, we're going to sue you for specific performance of this document, of this contract, even though it says it's not a contract. So of course, then the sellers had to spend money to go back and with their attorney to say, okay, but it's not a contract. So what are you suing us for specific performance of a contract for if it's not really a contract? Back and forth, back and forth. So $10,000 each of them later, the buyers finally said, all right, fine, we'll withdraw. So it's the only time I had a buyer get really aggressive. And it happened to be that the seller was an agent in the office who changed her mind after the buyers got jerky on her after inspections. So she decided to say, yeah, thanks so much. We're not selling the house anymore. And they thought, well, yes, you will. We'll force the issue. You can't make up the way people behave in terms of lawsuits in America, right? So it was what it was. But those are the 3 different paths that you have, the 3 different types of forms. that you have for writing the offer.
Would your liability insurance cover those legal expenses?
Yeah, great question. You mean the seller?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, right? It's a great question because
If you're the agent stroke seller.
yeah, it's kind of a business transaction. So maybe if you have like a commercial liability umbrella on top of your homeowners, I think regular just homeowners insurance, probably not.
Oh, no. I mean, I took out liability insurance as an agent and I
Yeah,
was
so
wondering if, and if
depending
you were
on,
agent stroke seller.
yeah, depending on if you could convince your insurance company that somehow your decisions as the seller of the property were tied to your representation,
Oh,
maybe,
right,
you know, we have to, likely they'd look for you to separate those two things out.
sure.
All right, Stuart.
Rick, if it's an as-is sale, but the client wants just peace of mind to do an inspection, can I put that in as a contingency so they may pull out, you know, pending the outcome of the inspection, or should I not bother even putting it down there?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about as is, right? In the state of Connecticut, every sale is an as is sale, right? We are an as is state. And so I understand the question was asked slightly differently than what I just said. And yet I do want to go on record as saying, just note, Connecticut is an as is state. So any inspection that's done, anything that's uncovered, regardless, you know, I hear all the time people say, oh, well, health and safety is a must. You know, if the radon comes in high, you know, the EPA says you have to mitigate that. None of that is true. Sellers have zero responsibility to handle any inspection item. Zero, none whatsoever, right? Doesn't matter if it's health related or safety related or radon related or buried oil tank related. They have other concerns to deal with if in fact those things pop up, because they may not be able to sell their house because lots of buyers may line up and say, we want that done. So there may be practical reasons why they agreed to some of those things, but the sellers have zero legal obligation in our state to respond or mitigate anything that comes up ever in an inspection.
So even
That being-
lead is
Sorry?
not, even lead is not mandatory. I was always told lead was mandatory,
It's well,
but nothing.
lead is a slightly different animal because the legislation on lead is federal, not
Right.
state,
That's
right?
right.
And so now the reality is, I sold a house in Stamford many moons ago to people who came in and said, we're doing a lead paint test. And I went back to them and said, okay, please be clear. This is a 1920s colonial. I guarantee you, if you bring people in to do a lead paint test, you will find lead all over the house because it was built in 1920. Now, the issue with lead, of course, is not that it's there, it's the condition of the lead paint. So if it's flaking or chipping or in a spot that rubs and might become airborne, that's when it becomes a problem. So I said to these buyers, look, here's the deal. I can guarantee you your people are going to find lead, and I can guarantee you I am not mitigating it at all. So you can do the inspection if you want, but if you find something and come back and ask me to do something, a credit or this or that, the answer is going to be no. So they did it, and they came back and said, well, did you know that there's lead? I told you that. I said, well, I think we want a $10,000 credit. And I said, great, I have other buyers I can sell the house to. Bye. Right. And then they said, yeah, okay, we got it. And they bought the house anyway. Right. They did try. So as is as is. Stuart's question was slightly different, but I wanted to get that out as well. So Stuart, if in an as is sale, if you wanted to, knowing that all sales are foundationally as is, if the seller says, look, I'm doing nothing, you can do your inspections if you so choose, but they'll be for your educational purposes only. Well, now your buyers have to decide, because waiving your inspection contingency is not the same as waiving inspections, right? Those are two different things. You can waive the inspection contingency and still do inspections. I do that all the time with my investment properties. It's never a contingency. It's always, but I always do them. So then now they're just for my purposes only. What I find, I find. And if I find something that's kind of a disaster, I don't have an opportunity to withdraw from the contract based on what I find, right? So I do a pre-inspection myself first to make sure that I'm safe there. Was that the question? Did I address the question?
Yes, Rick. Now, do you think doing an inspection would be a negative connotation for an as-is property? Because obviously it's going to be as-is. By doing it just for informational purposes, would the seller say, hey, I don't know about this one?
I mean, they certainly might. It's hard to answer for all sellers, but certainly, generally speaking, again, I do it all the time. They're just for informational purposes only. I'm buying a new property. I'm buying a new house. For me, inspections are like a user's guide. This is like a how-to for this new particular property. So,
Yeah.
if buyers are still looking for the how-to guide on this, on how to utilize this new property, and the agreement is already that everything is as is, I personally, as a seller, I wouldn't have an issue with it. But again, it's hard to speak for all sellers. So I think that the buyers just need to make a decision as to whether or not they feel the doing them anyway puts them at any kind of risk. I don't necessarily think so.
Rick,
Thanks.
even though it says as is, I know I've had some buyers in the past where they're very tight on their cash. And we've gone in a normal market and said it's a building contingency, even though we're under that understanding. Just so they're, say the roof is going to collapse, they have the opportunity to pull out. So
Yeah.
I find that even though it might say as is, depending on the situation, you can still ask for the contingency.
Yeah, yes, you absolutely can. And again, the idea of what buyers make contingent and what they don't really has to be a discussion with each particular buyer as to where their level of risk shows up and what the market's doing, right? Because there are ways to win, there are ways to not win, and a lot of that has to do with contingencies and whatnot. But certainly in as is scenarios, I will tell you that I've already gone in with the as is thing and said I'm just doing my inspections for educational purposes, and found something happening with the chimney that if I walked away, so here's how I negotiated it. I went back to the sellers and said, look, I know we talked about no inspection items coming back. However, there's a really serious issue with the chimney. So again, I don't know that I'm willing to accept the property with that serious an issue with the chimney. And so if I decide, and I was within my 5 business day, that's why I always get my inspections done within 48 hours, because I was still within my 5 business day attorney review, walk away for no reason, for any reason time period. And so I went back to them and said, look, I'm not going to have that convey. If I walk away, you now have to disclose that, because I'm making sure that you know every detail of this big problem. And so you're going to have to address it at some point. I still want to buy the property. Will you either give a credit or handle the chimney thing before we close? And without batting an eye, they said, you know what? We totally get it. Let's agree on a company to do it. We will cover the cost and we'll have it done before the closing. So, it doesn't always have to be such like combative contentiousness. I just find that if you talk clearly with people and treat people with respect and explain why the issue is the issue. Let me stop the recording real quick, because I don't